Okay. There we go. All right. Okay. So thank you, Peggy, for inviting me and setting up this event this evening. And thank you to the Sierra Club and 350 New Jersey Rockland. As Peggy knows, this is the first presentation that I've given on the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributary study, this new round. And, you know, she reached out when it was released, but it's such a complicated, massive bear of a project that, you know, I said, let's take a little time and, you know, give me and my team some time to really do research and get our teeth into this. And we have done that, although we're absolutely still early on in the process of assessing and looking at the implications of this massive plan. So, so what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give an overview of what is the plan, including where we are in the process, because this is a multi-year process. What are the alternatives that have been presented and the tentatively selected alternative that is now open for public comment, and then talk about what we're doing and our hopes to really bring about a better plan than the one that is currently being presented. And it seems like I might have a loose light bulb here. Okay. Hopefully that won't keep flickering. So, and I'm happy to, you know, have the discussion and open for questions. And if people want to start to put questions in the chat as we go, just to capture things, please go ahead and do that. So the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributary Study, New York, New Jersey Harbor Tributary Study, Coastal Storm Risk Management Study, which is actually the full long name of this massive plan. It was started coming out of Hurricane Sandy when Congress gave a mandate to the Army Corps of Engineers to address storm surge in this area. And the study area that they're referring to is in the map here that I'm showing, and they have it in some different subregions, but really everything that's outlined and has a color is the study area that they have been looking at. In addition to the Army Corps, there are non-federal partners who are, you know, absolutely critical and very much at the table in this whole process. Those are the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, New York State Department of State, and the City of New York. The first thing that happened, as you'll see in the timeline I'm going to share, is they did a cost sharing agreement. So they agreed that these are the partners, and the cost share for this study and future projects would be 65% federal dollars, 35% local. That's for the study to design and the build, but the operations and maintenance is all a cost that would then go to the local partners. So what's at stake? I mean, I have to say, when I made these slides, you know, almost every topic we're going to cover could be its own 30-minute presentation. So just really hitting things at the top level and with the lens of Riverkeeper and our mission as water protectors. What's at stake for the focus tonight is ensuring coastal communities and ecosystems are protected from what we call the three horsemen of the climate apocalypse: the storm surges, the sea level rise, and stationary storm systems. So all this heavy rain that we're seeing. The challenge, the central challenge that we face and continue to face with this study is that the congressional mandate is just for storm surges. It is not to be looking at these combined impacts to our communities. So right from the start, the question that has been posed that's being answered by the study is woefully too simplistic and too narrow. We also at stake is, you know, environmental justice and low mobility communities in particular. I believe last I heard, it's 60% low-income communities, and that means low mobility communities, environmental justice communities in the flood areas where these projects are proposed for this study. And of course, our ecosystems facing incredible threats from the rising seas and these other types of storms, not just sea level, or not just the storm surge. So the storm surge, just to be clear, is if you have something like we had in Hurricane Sandy, where you have a giant surging wave that comes in, that's part of a storm system. The stationary flooding is more like what we saw in Hurricane Ida, where you have a storm that comes more from the inland, and it's, just torrential rain that dumps a lot of rain on land, and it doesn't just come from the coast. And of course, we all know that we're already experiencing sea level rise, which will just accelerate. So we're going to call it HATS for the rest of the presentation here, the Harbor and Tributary Studies study. So the process with HATS, so we had Hurricane Sandy, which was the main impetus. Then in 2016, the cost sharing agreement, which identified basically what the study was going to be, who pays how much, who are the partners. Then in 2018, the Army Corps, is based on that agreement and what they were mandated from Congress, came out with 5 alternatives. And that was when Riverkeeper and others really got strongly engaged and mounted our opposition. As Peggy mentioned, we had a lot of support and outcry from communities that did not like, in particular, the plans that we were most focused on and worried about were the 2 scenarios where they actually would include a giant sea barrier down at the mouth of the Hudson River south of New York City. And I'll show you those. One of them was way down connecting Breezy Point in Brooklyn to Sandy Hook in New Jersey. That would be the largest ocean facing barrier ever built in the world, ever attempted in the world. And the next one that was going to choke off the Hudson River was going to be at the Verrazano Narrows, just a little further north. So these were the ones that we really felt were an existential threat to the life of the Hudson. And that was the focus of our campaign. And in addition to responding to the comments within that comment period that was open to us, we also started to look at legislative fixes. Can we do something around the legislative mandate to ask a better question, a more nuanced question, a broader question that would get us a better plan? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And as part of this whole process, a coalition actually came into being that's called the Rise to Resilience Coalition, that is still active. It's facilitated by the Waterfront Alliance in New York City. So that's one of many groups now, including the Sierra Club, that works on this, is working on this issue. So in 2019, then we had the interim report, which was another public comment period. It gave more details on the 5 alternatives, but it was still, very, very top level. And throughout, we had a lot of issues around very poor public engagement and public outreach from the Corps to be transparent, let people know what they're working on. In 2019, they did start to signal that they were probably not going to be moving forward with that giant barrier out at the mouth of the harbor, but all the alternatives were still on the table. Then in 2020, a certain president who didn't want to see any money go to help New York City stopped the funding, and the whole project came to a halt. And that was actually advantageous for us because it gave us more time to work on these legislative fixes. So we went forward and passed the Hudson River Climate Change Protection Act, which was supported by our local congressional delegation, calling for the Corps to be sure to include the impacts of sea level rise and stormy rain events. So that legislation was passed. We also worked on one of the big pieces of enabling legislation that gives the Corps its mandate. It's updated every 2 years, the Water Resources Development Act. So we succeeded in getting language in that also said, consider sea level rise, inland flooding, and heavy rain events. Also talking about engaging more with communities and getting a larger visibility and community voice in the planning. And to very explicitly say, don't start with gray infrastructure, don't start with walls, look at nature-based solutions, nature-based infrastructure, and start there and see how far we can build resiliency for this region before we start to put up giant walls and gates. So we were very happy. I will say we now, with the tentatively selected plan that has been released, we're not really seeing these two legislative mandates meaningfully reflected in what's come out, unfortunately. So in 2021, funding came back. The Biden administration told them to go forward and continue working on the plan. The plan picked up again, and we were hoping, based on the legislative work, that they would kind of go back to the drawing board, but they really just picked up the 5 alternatives and continued forward on the path they were on, which gets us to the tentatively selected plan and draft feasibility report that we all just received in November and that we are currently looking at and we'll talk about tonight for comments. This is how the Army Corps shares their process. So I've made those slides. I just thought it might be fun to show you all. This is what the Army Corps presents when you ask them where we are. So this is where we are. This is the tentatively selected plan. I'm not sure I remember the acronyms of all of these things, but this is their progress report. You can see the funding lapse. And anyhow, just a little comedy to share that. So back to my version of what the schedule is. Next steps. There are going to be public meetings. They have started and they'll go to the end of the comment period. We did put in a lot of requests with coalition partners for an extension. The original comment deadline, it was 90 days and it was going to be January 6th, ruining everybody's Christmas. But they just announced just a couple of days ago that they're actually going to extend to March 7th. So that's a big relief. Gives us more time to educate ourselves, bring more people into the comments, and continue to strategize on how we can move this plan in a direction that we want it to go to, if we can at all. So next milestones for the Corps. So they'll close the comment period on March 7th, and then they have their own decision milestone in April. This might move now that we got a 60-day extension. So they might get 60 more days on that, but that's the original deadline. The one they've published, that is when they decide if it's this tentatively selected plan or not. And then they have to submit a feasibility report next year. And the final big deadline is really the chief engineer's report. That kind of signals that they're done with the study period. And then it kind of starts the clock on the next phase, which would be once the study's done and they say this is what's needed, then they have to go back to Congress and start to get appropriations to build it. So this alternative that we're going to be looking at, alternative 3B, projected construction is to start in 2030 and to be complete by 2044. But in reality, they're probably going to appropriate for pieces of it. It's not expected that the federal government's going to say, okay, $52 billion to New York, go build this thing. It's probably actually going to be done in little pieces, and it's probably not going to be done by 2044, even if they build everything within this project. But this is like a scenario if they got the money and started in 2030. And between the 2024 deadline and the 2030 deadline, there would be more detailed plans on specific components. There would be environmental impact statements. There would be permitting. So a lot of more work and opportunities to weigh in before we got to that construction start date. So we're going to be talking about this for years to come. This is a marathon. Okay, so the question that we're focused on is, can we achieve a better process around this project, this massive project, and then reach a better plan coming out of it? So we would really like to see phase planning. This is this plan right now would be the largest plan that the Army Corps has ever undertaken. It is truly massive in scale, and the study area is so complex. So we would like to see it kind of broken down into smaller segments. We definitely want to see the multiple flooding sources and the compound flooding sources and other impacts of climate change addressed. We want to prioritize the nature-based systems, value ecosystems and ecosystem services, which is an economic term for how you look at what a healthy ecosystem does and put that into a cost-benefit analysis. The cost-benefit analysis that the Corps uses is really based on real estate and impacts on GDP, and it's not based on the ecosystems that this is all built on and what we're losing. And this is how that would be valued if we could get ecosystem services considered in the cost-benefit analysis. And we also want more community engagement and for the plans to be responsive to community needs, especially the frontline communities. We recognize that, Riverkeeper is a water protector, so we're going to speak on behalf of the waterways. But we also know, as we've been talking to partners, that there's different feelings within different communities of what they want. And there are some communities that are going to want, sea gates, which Riverkeeper is not in support of. But we do think it's important. All those voices should be heard, and it needs to be an open and inclusive conversation if we're going to arrive at something that people can live with and be intentional about the trade-offs that they are making on whatever plan does get built. Okay, so now I'm gonna share what these alternatives are. So at this moment in the process, where we're at is they started with the 5 alternatives, very top level. Like I said, we did 2 rounds of comments on those, and then there was the pause. Now, the plan that they've just released, which is just shy of 600 pages, the main document, and then there's over 1,000 pages in addendums. This is the one where they really actually go into each of the alternatives, the 5 different alternatives, and really say how they measure and compare up to each other. So you do start to get some insight in how they're doing the cost-benefit analysis. It's a very interesting report, and I encourage everybody to look at it. There'll be some links later. You can read it online. You can print it off. There's some public meetings where you can hear from the Corps. But there's a lot of really good information that they've pulled together about ecosystems, wildlife, real estate, transportation, just all the different parts of our communities here and how they'll be impacted by climate. So the first alternative is the no action alternative. And that's really interesting. It's basically the Corps saying, if we do nothing, here's all of these cascading impacts. Here's where power is going to go down. Here's where transit's going to be inaccessible. Here's where emergency vehicles won't be able to get to communities. All of the things that we're looking at. So it's pretty sobering. Alternative 2 is one of the ones that we very much fought against, and I'll show you a picture of that. That was that giant harbor barrier. Alternatives 3A and 3B are series of smaller barriers without that giant one at the bottom, but 3A does include the barrier at Verrazano Narrows and Throgs Neck. And they only work in company with each other, because if there's a big surge, you got to close both doors if you're trying to close a box and be inside of it. So that is one that we very much do not want to see move forward. Alternative 4, single basin storm surge barriers and shore-based measures. I'll show you the picture of that one. And 5 is actually the one that we supported in our first round of comments. 5 was the only one that did not include storm gates. So this is one where all of the protective measures are shore-based measures and the waterways are left free and flowing. Okay, so what we really fought against, as I said, was 2. This shows right down here, and you'll see it again later, this, the largest proposed ocean-facing sea gate on the planet. It would have been, ecologically devastating for the Hudson if it went into place and was closed with greater regularity. So one of our main concerns about the gates is because the gates are only designed for a storm surge, this 100-year storm, which now comes more frequently than 100 years, but it's relatively infrequent. But we know that sea level rise is going to happen. We know rain events are going to happen that create flooding. We know that there'll even be, localized flooding from, cloud bursts and rainy day flooding and high tides. We know that there'll be pressure on the local partners, New York City, for the most part, to close the gates more than they're designed to be closed, because these other flooding events will become increasingly more frequent. The worry is that the gates will not just be held for the 100-year storm, but they'll be closed whenever there are flooding threats. And then it's that kind of heavier use of the gates that starts to really change the life in these waterways. It changes the tidal flow, it changes the tidal reach, it creates, pileup of sediment, it affects fish migratory patterns. So these are the worries and the reason why we're against these massive gates, and honestly, the smaller gates for the most part as well. When this plan was out in the world, and this is actually may still be the case, but in 2019, because of this plan, the Hudson River was designated one of America's most endangered rivers. So we are not alone in this assessment. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the pictures of the barriers as they appear in the study, in the print study. So like I said, alternative 1 is do nothing. So there's not really a picture for that comparable to these pictures. Alternative 2, so this is the one that has this giant gate down here. And then the red is the shoreline-based, varieties of different shoreline-based measures behind the barrier. And it also has the other barrier. This is the one at Throgs Neck. So they got to box out the whole Hudson River estuary by keeping the water from coming in and out of the Sound and the East River, and keeping it coming in and out from the Atlantic Ocean. This is 3A. It's a similar principle, but they've moved the barrier up from this point to here. So this is the Verrazano Narrows. So you have a gate here, and then you have a gate closing off Jamaica Bay. And then, of course, you have the Throgs Neck Gate, and then some of these local shoreline-based measures, and actually another gate down here. So this is also a scenario that we really oppose. And unfortunately, it says in the plan right now that based on the Army Corps' whole plan includes sea level rise projections in terms of the design of all of the measures. So they're not looking to protect against sea level rise, but they're saying whatever we build needs to withstand sea level rise. So if we're building a wall, we have to protect for sea level rise and make it 12 feet taller, just as an example, because we know within 50-year lifespan of the project, the sea level rise is going to go up 10 feet. So that's how sea level rise shows up in the plan. And the plan says that if their sea level rise projections are lower than what sea level rise ends up being, which is generally thought that their sea level rise projections are too low, that they would automatically switch. If that's found by the time they get into the construction phase, they would automatically switch from 3B to 3A, which is a profoundly different plan. So that's of great concern to us. Oh, going forward, I put 3B at the end. That's the one that's selected. So I'll save that for last. So alternative 4. So this one is fewer barriers and a combination of onshore measures. So you can see there's still the gate at Jamaica Bay. There's now these smaller local gates that you'll see in 3B. It's a gate at Flushing Creek, a gate at Newtown Creek, a gate at Gowanus Canal, and then also some gates up here in the New Jersey system, plus shore-based measures. But this is not selected because the cost benefit analysis, and this is 5, the one that we all originally said we felt was the least destructive. So it's all shore-based measures. There are no gates. But one downside of this one is it really is geographically very limited. So, you have Manhattan being protected, and you have some of the Port of New Jersey, but it's pretty small in its focus. So the one that they selected is this one, Alternative 3B, the tentatively selected plan. So we are happy and will take some comfort knowing that there are no massive barriers that are blocking off the flow of the Hudson River. So that's a victory for all of our advocacy, and we're grateful for that. But it still does have 12 of these gates on the waterways. So you have Jamaica Bay, you have the 3, the Flushing, Newtown, and Gowanus. Over here, multiple gates around the New Jersey waterfront and kind of closing off the port system there. And then quite a few shoreline-based measures. There was a version of this plan that included going all the way up the Hudson, north of the Tappan Zee Bridge with smaller gates, and those have been removed. So there was a version that had gates in Tarrytown and Ossining and Stony Point and Yonkers, but they have stripped those out and are saying that they'll recommend shoreline-based measures for north of the GWB, and that's to be determined. So they've just kind of flagged it, but there's nothing in the plan right now. So we continue to have issues around the process. I'll get to that later. But, when we have the same issues around these gates and how they're going to impact the water quality, the life in the river, sediment, and with sediment also comes pollution and pollution impacts. So I will show you, if this works, just real quickly, what you can see on the site. So here's some highlights of 3A, some specific locations of the larger gates and where the shoreline-based measures are. They do have a map that we will click into here. Actually, I'm going to do it a slightly different way. I already opened it. I'm going to do it this way. You can go in and try and get this to reload. You can go in and kind of click around and zoom in. Oh, I have to start from the beginning again. That's too bad. So it's a story map on this page, and you go in, there we are. And you can drill in. It's not a great user interface, but you can go into some of these areas and start to kind of click on what they have on here, and it tells you little really technical pop-ups, like this is a flood wall, there's the flood wall and here's the gate. So that's what's available to us as members of the public, in addition to the giant print plan. So I'm not finding it very useful myself, but there you have it. Yeah, so I'm going to move on from this for now. Okay, this is something else that actually I think is more instructive. So this is a rendering. There's a couple renderings that they have to give us an idea of what the gates will look like. The main takeaway here is that this is a rendering of the gate that they are proposing for the mouth of Jamaica Bay. And what you're seeing here is this is a bridge that's in place. This is the gate. So instead of having a gate that could retract onto the landscape and not impact the tidal exchange and constrain the tidal exchange in this waterway, which is a style of gate that is built, they're proposing these gates where they build these long expanses of walls that are like semi-pervious, and then a much smaller gate and a navigation channel out in the middle of these waterways. So they're basically, even when these gates are open, as you can see, they're permanently constraining the tidal flow entering these waterways. If this gate was never closed, this gate as designed would still profoundly impact the life of Jamaica Bays and how sediment moves back and forth and how boats move and how wildlife moves. So this is a cost-saving measure. This is not wanting to pay to take landscape and instead put the expense within the waterway and the life in the water. So this is an unacceptable approach to us. So our position on the HATS study, as I shared before, the framework is just way too limited. It's like a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't address all the issues that we're facing locally. And the approach of cost-benefit analysis that they use doesn't consider environmental impacts. It's too focused on real estate and just the costs of gray, hard human infrastructure. We will be saying in our comments, no matter what, the Corps should not consider alternatives 2 and 3A. We hope we've won the fight against these mega gates, but certainly, nothing's done until it's done. So that's still a position that has to be echoed over again. And the shore-based measures, as we think about supporting, how we're going to comment, we're not feeling that we should go back just to 5 at this point, because we feel that the way that the shore-based measures only proposal, first of all, the way they do their cost benefit analysis, it came up woefully inadequate. So we're pretty confident the Corps is not going to move forward with 5. It's the most expensive, but it doesn't show their return on investment at a scale that would justify them doing the project. We also are concerned that it leaves out too many communities. And then you can see listed here, those are the communities I mentioned that have been identified, flagged for some measure, but currently there's nothing specified. In terms of what we'd like to see for coastal resilience, the gates are not the answer. The gates and the infrastructure that would be just having those gates there while they were open will trap and accumulate pollutants because the sediment won't flow as freely. And whenever you have sediment buildup, a lot of the pollutants we have in our waterways, they attach to sediment, pathogens, toxins, plastics, they're little microscopic things that move with the sediment. So if we have barriers and walls that are trapping sediment, you're creating a pollution hotspot where there isn't one. So communities that are right adjacent to these structures will be exposed to more pollution in that instance. We support more living shoreline, wetlands, and nature-based features, and for those to be used whenever possible. On the good news ledger, side of the ledger, the Biden administration during the recent COP announced that there's a creation now of, I'm trying to remember the name, the nature-based, nature and nature-based measures roadmap, where they are calling in an executive order format for federal agencies to use nature-based measures more and wherever possible. So that is, we're getting the right message from the executive. The Biden administration also issued an executive order very early on in their administration, calling on all federal agencies to revisit how they spend money, how they do cost-benefit analysis to identify and weed out environmental racism, and to invest in a way that starts to undo some of the harms of environmentally overburdened communities. And we do know from the Corps, when we've heard the presentations about 3B, that one of the reasons why the Corps feels enthusiastic about 3B is it does actually bring in environmentally burdened communities on a much bigger scale. And they have said in presentations that it's important for the chiefs that they know they need to make sure that it's not just protect the highest value real estate. This isn't just put a wall around Wall Street. This needs to benefit low income, low mobility communities too. So we're not seeing that so much in the plan other than the scope right now. but we're still at this very top level of the plan. I mean, there's so few details other than shore-based measure, very generally expressed here, and, you know, gate there. So the devil's in the details. Coastal resiliency protection, this is just restating that we also want to make sure that that really shows up in a meaningful way in the plans. And we also think that retreat needs to be the part of any plan for the New Jersey Harbor region. If we don't really start to talk honestly about retreat at this point, this is just buying time in some of these areas. You're either going to end up with a community that lives inside of a concrete box, or you're just doing something temporary with the inevitable that in 50, 60, 70 years, we're going to have to do retreat anyhow. And so we would like to see a real conversation and be a part of a real conversation addressing that. So at this point, we are asking the Corps to do more with their public outreach, and we are also calling on the non-federal partners to do more. They certainly have more channels and visibility within these communities, and they've really been not driving public engagement. If anyone gets the DEC newsletters, there's no mention of this plan. There's no promotion of these public meetings. So that's just unacceptable. And we really want to see those partners step up and facilitate meaningful public engagement. Then the second bullet here just talks about having more in-person meetings. We have asked the Army Corps, this Rise to Resilience Coalition, and our partners at Columbia University to create an environmental and climate justice working group. That hasn't happened yet, but we are having conversations about that, and they've expressed some openness to it, although time is running down, and we've been recommending that for quite a few months. So we're not sure if it's going to happen in time to be meaningful for this round of comments. But we did manage to get an extension on the comment period. So that's the progress point on this list. And I'm almost done, and then let's have a conversation. So if the Corps goes forward with 3B, we are going to be commenting, basically saying that we think 3B is the right geographic reach in terms of the communities that it helps, but that the actual strategies within it are problematic, especially the gates. But if they go forward with 3B, we want them to minimize the impact to the life in our waterways, and that, getting into that idea of what the gates look like and not restricting the tidal flow, not putting obstructions on river bottoms that would stop fish from migrating. And there's other kind of technical, mechanical things that can be done to minimize the damage to life done by these barriers. Also, similar things to prevent the damage to water quality around toxins that are in the water, and accumulation of toxins, and stopping natural flushing. And then there's the combined sewage overflows. So anyone who knows these waterways in New York City knows that Newtown Creek, Flushing Creek, Gowanus Canal, every time it rains, raw, untreated sewage and wastewater is dumped in the millions of gallons into these waterways. And, what's going to happen to that if the gate's closed and it's a storm and it's raining and there's sewage flowing. So if there's going to be gates, they have to get rid of the combined sewer overflows so people aren't trapped in their communities with these toxins, rising up and coming into their basements. And similarly, we also are going to be calling for them to remediate the Superfund sites. So who wants to be gated in with a Superfund site that isn't completely remediated and have, ancient Exxon, oil and tar, rising up into your community and being held in by a gate? So where are we now? We are working on bringing our comments together and looking at comments to 3B. We're talking to a lot of partners like yourselves tonight, working with experts, trying to get more information to inform our position. We are talking about how we can pressure these non-federal partners, our state officials and city officials, and our congressional reps, who actually have been the more available and helpful partners to date, to again, get back to the question, to ask a better question, to give a better mandate for the Corps. And then working on what are the intersections that we can find between what the Corps is saying that they're doing and other plans and opportunities that are coming forward or underway around New York City already. And then finally, by way of inspiration, there are other communities that we're looking at who are having some success in changing the Corps' path. So this project is actually part of a bigger nationwide effort to protect coastal communities from storm surges. It's all enabled by legislation that dates back to 1955, amazingly. So they're doing similar work in Charleston, North Carolina, in Miami, and elsewhere. And in Charleston and in Miami, the local communities, by being more organized and having alternatives of their own, or a more organized and engaged local government partner to say, we want to bring about our own alternatives, are getting the Corps to stop and reconsider what they're doing. Most specifically in Miami, Miami-Dade, the mayor and their county leadership has said, we want to work with the federal government, but give us time. They put their plan on pause so they could come up with a locally selected plan, which is a scenario that's on the table within this comment period. It's basically, tell us if you agree with the tentatively selected plan. If you think we should pick one of the other 5 alternatives, tell us why. Tell us the questions that we should be looking at and maybe haven't looked at deeply enough in this current assessment. And or is there a locally preferred plan that you want us to consider? And we don't have any of our partners, our local partners, putting forward a locally preferred plan right now, which is a frustrating missed opportunity. So be engaged, stay engaged. There's 2 in-person public meetings if you want to go out and be with the Corps in person in New York City. This is like a Wall Street down at the way end of the city address. There will also be some more virtual presentations that they give. So I really encourage you to show up and participate as you can. And you can join our mailing list. We'll promote those as well. And I'll show you the website for the Corps that you can go to get access to the report, see that story map, sign up for public meetings. So that is the end of my presentation. But maybe I'll just leave this up for another minute if anyone's writing those down. Although, Peggy, I think we could probably I'll just give them to you and you could email them around afterwards as well, I'm guessing. Okay, I see you're nodding. So with that, so this is my aspirational, this was my favorite photos ever. I love this photo from years back when there was a humpback whale in the Hudson River down by New York City, and people got these beautiful photos of the whale playing in the water. So this is just great affirmation of the progress that we've made. And, the whales are back in large numbers off the southern end of New York Harbor, living off the New York Bight year round now. And that's because clean water that is full of life, that is full of menhaden and krill and all the things that these megafauna need to live on is showing up now reliably enough that they're coming back. So we've made incredible progress. And this is what we need to fight to continue to protect in this effort.
Thank you so much, Tracy. That was extremely helpful. Maybe what I'm going to do is stop recording now. If I can figure out how to do that. Okay.